All right. Hey, guys. I'm TJ. This is Atheist Edge. We're actually live right now with a very special guest we have in the studio, Thomas Westbrook. Woo! Holy Koolaid. Yay! All right. So Thomas was good enough to come down here and sit with us in the studio today, answer a few questions, have some fun, drink some coffee, apparently.
They're lying. I'm like Tupac. I'm hologramish right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, no, I promise he actually is in studio. Yeah, I mean, I know you see the green screen and everything, but yeah, we're actually here. We're live. Actually, kind of the first thing I want to ask you, this leads into another question that I had. Was it hard for you to come out as an atheist, like to friends and family and stuff like that?
To friends, not so much. Most of my friends were already not super religious or kind of, if they were religious, then they were kind of non-judgmental in that regard, and they kind of saw it coming.
Okay.
Family was a little bit more tricky, a little more difficult. It took some time. It took a lot of baby steps, and, I probably came out a little bit too quickly with my parents, kind of got forced out.
Yeah.
But, my siblings, because I feel like the younger generation, like millennials and whatnot, like they tend to be more understanding of doubts and understanding of, hey, maybe everything in the Bible isn't literal. And that doesn't really mesh so well with, the baby boomer generation, where they're raised in this culture of it's the godless communists versus
what you're told versus,
or, when you have the Cold War going on, and it's like anyone who's communist is like an atheist and horrible, evil person, and anyone who's American is a good Christian. And it's a false dichotomy. It's, there were lots of Christians who were atheists during the Cold War, and there still are today. Mm-hmm. And there were lots of Russians who were, Russian Orthodox or Catholic or Protestant Christians.
Well, I mean, as far my take on that was more that was more about state dogma than atheism.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it wasn't like, because we're atheists, we're going to slaughter all these people. It was like, don't hold anything in higher esteem than the state, which is us. So therefore, we're going to commit all these atrocities to try to get people, scare people in line into falling in line with state dogma.
Well, and leading up to that, you had, the Tsar, when he was in power, and he had, kind of a feudal system where you do not question authority.
Yeah,
you do not, if you have any kind of state where you instill people with values of critical thinking and curiosity and questioning authority, and these are Enlightenment ideals that have taken us hundreds of years to really accept as normal. That didn't exist in Tsarist Russia. And then all of a sudden, when you have the communist regime come to power, it's ripe for manipulation. It's ripe for someone like Stalin to come in and basically say, you know what, like, I am now that authority.
Right.
I am now essentially the deity.
Yeah.
And so you get a little bit of my my international studies and Russian past.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I think it's interesting to also note. It's interesting of note that he was training to be a Catholic priest before he took the reins of power in Russia too. So.
He was, honestly, I think that's a bit of a red herring, because it just in the same way that when someone says, oh, Stalin was an atheist and that's what informed his actions. I don't think that, and I do think that there are people who use religion for evil, and they'll use it as a tool for power. I don't think that really affected Stalin's actions. I think that he was a narcissist, and that he basically saw an opportunity to seize power, and he did. And he could have been an atheist, he could have been a Christian. I don't think it would have made any difference.
Yeah, I think you're right. So we covered friends, family. That actually kind of leads into another thing I was going to ask you about. So it was easier for friends, a little bit more fraught with difficulties as far as family goes, but. So, like, how many of the 5 mistakes did you make?
Ooh.
And I know what I'm talking about.
You're talking about, so in one of my...
For everybody...
I have a video that's 5 mistakes not to make when you're coming out as an atheist.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I'm trying to think what all of them were off the top of my head, because it was a couple months ago. I definitely had a social safety net in place because I didn't even become an atheist until I had a college degree and I had a job and I was living on my own. And I, you know, so in that regard, like I didn't have to worry about, oh, if my family disowns me, well, I'm, you know, out living.
You'd already played the long game.
Well, it wasn't so much playing the long game for me. It was just that I was still a Christian until I was self-sufficient. And I mean, I started having these doubts, and it was kind of like the last year in college that I started becoming an atheist. But around that time, you know, I was like, okay, you know, now I'm self-sufficient, but I'm also kind of going to ease into it. The mistake that I think the biggest mistake that I made was with my family. I didn't come out to them publicly of my own volition with my parents.
You were outed.
Kind of. I started putting out videos, and initially the videos were going to be a response for me to basically share with my family, hey, this is why I no longer believe. These are some of these big ideas that I want to wrestle with without being interrupted or shut down. Like I want to be able to put it in video format and then share it with you. Mm-hmm. And as I started doing that, I started seeing a lot of harm that was happening by religion and a lot of ridiculous things as I was reading the Bible cover to cover. And so I started putting out these animated Bible myths where I would kind of poke fun at religion a little bit. And they found those and found them extremely offensive.
Yeah, as Christians do when they see stuff like that. Yeah.
And so in that regard, I should have done it on my terms.
Yeah.
But yeah, since then it's kind of been trying to pedal just a little bit and, you know, go about things a little bit slower and tell them, you know, hey, like, I don't hate you. I don't have anything against you. I fight for your, you know, right to believe differently than me. But I just, you know, it's not that I want to live a life of sin or anything like that. Yeah. I just want to go where the truth is.
Y'all just want to sin. Yeah.
Sitting over here drinking my evil coffee.
Yeah, your evil coffee, and you know, having your baby snack later and whatnot. When you talk about influences, though, too, it's like that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about. We're coming off about 11 days ago. December 15th was the anniversary of Hitch's death. He died in 2011. Was watching videos of his or reading anything of his something that influenced you at all in your journey escaping superstition?
Escaping it? Not so much Hitch. Somewhat. It was more, I stumbled across Christopher Hitchens' work later, like as I was already like, I'd pretty much started down the road already. That door was open. And for me, the biggest influences were probably just understanding the kind of the basics of how science works.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't even, you know, here's all this evidence for evolution, because when you don't understand how science works, then you see all this, these pieces of evidence and you're like, oh, it's a conspiracy by scientists. But if you actually start to kind of, you know, get a little bit involved in the scientific community and actually, you know, meet people, talk to people, see how it works. And then you start to realize, wait a second,
these guys are trying to tear each other apart all the time.
The world who are trying to destroy each other's theories. And it's only the ones that are, you know, that withstand all scrutiny, that hold, you know, that get Nobel Prizes and that are able to, you know, be built upon.
Yeah, and because the whole purpose of science is to see what everybody else is saying and then try to poke as many holes in it as you can. When it stands up on its own, that's when it's accepted as consensus and stuff like that. Yeah. Jim said that Steve McCrae, you just interviewed him not too long ago. He said hi. He wanted us to give him a shout out. So
hey, Steve,
great debate community. Thanks for watching.
Steve has a channel where he brings a bunch of people who love science on, and they will talk about big ideas. It's called the Great Debate Community. But yeah, I just had him on, so
yeah, I saw the.
He's a great guy.
He is a good guy, man.
But yeah, once I had that kind of understanding of how science works, you know, I wasn't an astrophysicist, I wasn't a chemist. Right. I didn't have like this deep understanding of like, you know, Bell's theorem or something like that, or quantum mechanics. I just, once I had a little bit of an understanding, I was like, that's cool. I want to know more about that. And then I started finding, you know, YouTube channels like Vsauce and Minute Physics and watching TED Talks and, you know, ASAP Science. And then as I got more of a base, then I was like, well, why is it that people think Christians are so stupid? Like, why is it that, you know, I'm a Christian, I like science, like what's going on here? And so I remember Google or typing into YouTube, you know, why do people laugh at Christians? And the first thing that came up was Thunderfoot has his Why Do People Laugh at Creationists series.
Yeah.
And he was just taking all of these ideas that I had been taught as a kid. Things like
started deconstructing them for you a little bit.
Yeah, like I remember watching Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed, which is Ben Stein.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
And
if my eyes rolled any harder just now, I think they would have rolled right out of my head.
he took on Sarah Palin. He took on Ken Ham, Kent Hovind, like all these, you know, creationists who are like, oh, this is like this great person who's here to combat the evil evolutionists and stuff. And he took everything, and at that point, I kind of had enough of a base.
Took some Richard Dawkins stuff way out of context too. I looked at some of that. Yeah. It's like really gross, man.
But I had enough of a base that I knew that what he was saying made sense. I had already had, you know, like some college level physics courses and biology courses, and I knew how science worked enough to be able to tell that the stuff he was talking about, I could kind of see how these creationists were telling a one-sided narrative.
Yeah.
And that
I think it's
really
more dishonest than unintelligent, though. I mean, because it's like when I like think about my own journey going in that direction too, it's like I don't think that I got any more intelligent when I got to the point where I recognized that I identified as an atheist. It's just that I kind of like dropped that veneer of like, I'm saying this is the truth and I know it, to, well, I mean, what is it to know a thing? Like you if you're just going to assert truth and not demonstrate things, that's a little bit of a bad pitfall to be engaging in, as far as like if you weren't trying to be intellectually honest. I think there's a lot of intellectual dishonesty in religious dogma.
Intelligence is so multifaceted. A lot of times, and I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to intelligence that I find frustrating, is that so many people think it's fixed. They think that you're born with this set IQ of like, well, I have a 122 and therefore I'm smarter than, you know, over half the population. It's just not like that.
No,
And I think one of the biggest shifts is like, my IQ didn't take a massive spike the second that I became an atheist.
Right.
But there was something that clicked where I decided that no idea was too sacred to question.
The idea of how information came in and went out.
That is a leap in thinking. It's a cognitive shift, a paradigm shift, if you will, where suddenly you start to think of things in terms of, if something's true, it's going to withstand any kind of scrutiny you throw at it. And so, you know, in a way you didn't become smarter, but you started thinking in a different way. And that is how intelligence works. It's this constant fluid thing that, you know, suddenly now you're able to look into things in a new way that you were never able to before.
It's like I just decided that it mattered to me whether or not the things I believed were true.
And the emotional walls that were defending your faith before.
And they were very much present.
Once you took a hammer to those, you're suddenly able to look at things more objectively.
So another thing kind of going along with the friends and family thing, it's like, so it's been so in my life, I'm not sure about in yours, but like, has there ever been times like in the past where people that were religious in your life have done things to maybe hurt you or something along those lines? And was it hard or difficult for you after you became an atheist to then forgive those people that did those things?
With the latter, not so much, because like I don't like holding grudges, and I think that's one thing that my parents ingrained in me as a kid, was that like the only person that really hurts is you. And there's times when like you realize like, hey, this person is toxic, they hurt, you know, like they're not changing, like I can't be around that. And so you can, you know, throw up barriers and, you know, give yourself some distance and some space. But like, I don't know, I prefer to not live under a cloud of resentment and hate. So like forgiveness for me has always like, I try to just let stuff roll off my back. But there are some family members who have said some things that I felt have been kind of hurtful. you know, I had an uncle one time around Thanksgiving that said, you know, hey, I don't really feel comfortable having you in my home if you're going to be like a, you know, atheist extremist.
Oh, he was
And
worried about the activism
well,
aspect.
and my reaction to that, I was kind of dumbfounded at first, and then I thought about it. I was like, wait a second.
He thinks you're
Religious
attacking
extremists.
his...
He's like, you're just as bad as the religious extremists. I'm like, religious extremists slaughter cartoonists, like with Charlie
Yeah.
Hebdo. I write cartoons or draw cartoons. Like there's a
Yeah.
big difference there. There's a, you know, where do you draw the line? Well, you draw the line at violence,
Violence or actions,
promoting violence. And that's where, you know, where I draw the distinction is, yeah, I think that, you know, I'm not going to, you know, not say something because I'm too worried about people are going to get offended. Well, your opinion might be offensive to someone else.
Yeah.
But you have to, in a free society, you have to build up kind of a shield to stuff like that.
Yes.
You know, there's things I see all the time that offend me that religious people do that I might find offensive, but I let them say that because it's a free society. And, you know,
freedom of speech is a valuable tool. It's more of a mechanism than simply a right, in my opinion.
Oh, it's a free market.
Marketplace of ideas.
The best ideas win.
Yeah.
And, you know, hopefully net neutrality doesn't change our equal voice, but that's a whole nother rabbit
that is
trail,
a whole nother that is a whole nother rabbit hole that we could go down that we could probably spend a lot of time on. But that actually, though, what we just talked about, though, is a good segue. So we have a segment of the population, especially in this country. Well, I mean, I guess it's more prevalent abroad, especially in Europe, but we have this thing where people don't want to talk about stuff like Islam and the ideas that are put forth in the Quran and stuff like that, where if you say anything simply against the ideas that are presented by the ideology, where you're labeled as a bigot or you're labeled as a racist or you're labeled as someone who isn't sensitive to the rights of people of color or anything along these lines. I mean, what is your thought on as far as like what should be in bounds or out of bounds when talking about Islam?
When it comes to talking about Islam, I think that we owe it to ex-Muslims and closeted atheists living in the Middle East and in places like Bangladesh who don't have a voice
to say what they can't say,
to speak up and question these ideas. Because we're not going after people, we're not going after cultures.
No.
And I mean, I had a white American middle-class male friend, coworker at Texas A&M who was a Muslim. You know,
right? Because what does Islam look like, right? Like,
you know, I spent probably 15 years of my life in the Muslim world. And I've seen people who have been ostracized by family members. I've seen people who have been, you know, pulled from taxi cab. I haven't seen this personally, but I've known people. I stayed with a woman who was pulled from a taxi cab and shot by the Taliban. And I still carry her business card in my pocket. And, you know, I've seen this range of anywhere from, you know, don't question these ideas because they're so sacred that, you know, it triggers outrage and it makes everyone want to, you know, create some kind of lynch mob and kill you and your family or whatever else. All the way from that to, you know, having just the blasphemy law in place where you just get like a small slap on the wrist or a fine or something like that.
Right.
But all of that is ridiculous. It's like
it's all bad. Yeah.
If this is the most amazing word of God that is completely perfect,
it should stand any scrutiny.
Then you should be taking it to every single scientific institution and, you know, holding it up like a pillar of golden wisdom and be like, tear this apart, show that there's, you know, one single flaw from it, and we'll throw it out if you do.
Right.
And, you know, if it's true, nobody will be able to be assailed, and they shouldn't be afraid of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that we owe it to them to question this stuff because it does lead to, and if you care about human rights, it leads to a massive number of human rights violations.
If you care about women's rights,
all of that, like if you start reading through the Quran and the Hadith, like you'll see, you know, surahs that will advocate for, you know, a woman's testimony is half that of a man's.
Yeah.
And, you know, you'll see verses that are advocating for, you know, death to apostates, to there's, oh, you're taking that out of context. The Quran, has more verses talking about peace.
Well, the funny thing about that is, though, is that when it says, Muhammad did say that when there is a disparity between something said earlier and something said later, the thing that's said later is supposed to take precedence, right? And what's the most bloody book of the Quran? It's the Surah. It's the most recent one.
Well, I think the Surah is just like it's like saying verse.
Right. Well,
but
right. It's the latest. That's the latest and greatest, though. Apparently,
I think that saying that, hey, if I say something that's contradicted by something that I say later, that's kind of just like a dead giveaway of a con artist. It's like, con artistry 101. Yeah. But here's what gets me is, if this is the perfect word of God and the Quran is completely flawless, well, a newspaper editor knows that the average person reads at like probably around a 6th grade level or below. And so they write 6th to 9th grade level, like, so they write at a very simplistic level. Like, you pick up a newspaper and there's not going to be like these massive words that nobody can understand. Yeah. They're trying to take complex topics and condense them down in a very simple way that can't be taken out of context. If a newspaper editor knows this, you'd think that the freaking God of the universe would be able to understand the same concept.
That's something
and tailor his book accordingly.
Yeah. Like, why would an omnipotent, perfect being choose one of the worst ways to communicate with his creation that we know of to do it? Like text.
Yeah,
that's the worst way to communicate.
How many years before the printing press, before the internet, in the most backwards, uncivilized region of a desert?
While the Chinese and the people in the eastern part of the world had that stuff way before. Yeah, it's like, why would you choose that location, right?
Or if why not just write it out on the moon?
Yeah,
like indisputable.
Yeah.
And do it in such a way that is like God magic, where everyone is able to look up at it and see exactly what's written there in their own language. You
should have communicated in a way that there should be no like question whether or not this being that did this was in fact perfect. I mean, there should be no question if it was. I mean, if he was going to try to do something, why do it through text? If you're going to try to convey a message, why do it through languages that die off and change? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Well, and then the other thing is, they'll say, well, almost every single, there's 99% of the Quran is peaceful, wonderful stuff. Like, you can't just throw that out
without qualifying it with something else.
And I'm like, wait, well, okay, maybe that's true, but let's say that 1% of it isn't, then it's not perfect. It's 1% flawed.
Yeah, exactly.
And I would argue that it's a lot more than 1%, but even if it is just 1%, I'm not going to drink a beautiful glass of clean water if it has 1 drop of turd in
it. That's a good analogy. It's like if somebody baked you a pie, right, and put it like a turd in the center of it, would you eat around the turd?
Yeah, exactly. But
I don't think you would do that.
As someone who is an atheist, I can, dissect the Quran and be like, okay, wait, is this true? And look at it objectively.
Scientifically, or if it makes a claim.
Yeah, rather than saying like it's the perfect word of God, we have to therefore accept 100% of it, then why not be able to take out the good bits and take out the good bits of the Bible and of the Bhagavad Gita and out of all these other holy books,
and write Bible 2.0 or Quran 2.0 or
don't call it sacred.
Yeah.
Don't call it sacred.
Like,
just say
this is our best guess. Yeah.
Or just, it's like having good poetry. I can read Ralph Waldo Emerson without thinking that, God farted it out of his butt. Like, it's not hard to be able to kind of cherry pick the good bits, just like Christians do, and say, okay, the rest of it are bad bits. Like,
that's true. Yeah.
It just takes a little critical thinking and a little bit of honesty.
So you talked about living in Muslim majority countries for 15 years. Was this part of the missionary work that your parents did while you were growing up, or was that something different?
Well, a good chunk of that was.
What was that like? I mean,
well, to answer the first question, I did some missions work myself, and then I did a lot of travels and stuff after college.
I gotcha.
What was it like being a missions kid?
Yeah. What was it like growing up with missionary parents?
Honestly, I had a pretty good childhood.
It was good. Okay.
I wasn't a crazy rebellious kid that was like doing heroin or something. Like I wasn't like the stereotypical horrible rebellious
you were on the straight edge program.
But I wasn't completely straight edge. My parents were pretty lenient, so like they would let me like go out and hang out with friends, and every once in a while, like over there was no drinking age limit. And so I would go out with my friends and we'd play a game of pool and we might get a beer while I was in high school, and nobody cared. It wasn't like an act of rebellion. It was just kind of like not a big
when you
thing.
Don't it's great and weird how when you don't stigmatize things that are completely normal to the human experience, how much healthier it plays
where
out.
I think my upbringing was very sexually repressed. Like that was the one area my parents were very much like opposed to.
Yeah.
And I wish that they had maybe had a little bit more of a kind of a healthy take on that.
Mm-hmm.
But aside from that, I mean, I don't feel like I was overly sheltered. I got to explore and travel and,
So I'm going to do a couple of these rapid fire because we've gone a little bit longer. So War on Christmas. Real? Imagined?
It's a figment of Bill O'Reilly's imagination.
Okay. I like that answer. Meaning of life. What's your meaning? What gives your life meaning?
I think that every single person, the word "the meaning of life,"
that's a little bit.
You have to take the out of that, and that is the worst misconception.
There's not a
because maybe your grandma gave you this shirt right before she passed away. That shirt doesn't mean anything to me.
No, but it means
something to you. And so for people to think that there's just like one answer to the meaning of life, it's like, no, find things that give your life meaning, that give others joy, that make the world better and more amazing for the whole human race.
Yeah.
Live your life to the fullest. That
human flourishing
gives meaning to me.
Yeah. I like that answer. Plans for International Condom Day?
International Condom Day.
Do you have any plans for this momentous occasion?
Use them.
Use them? Yeah, I like that. Quick 1 or 2 impressions of famous interviewees. Seth, somebody.
Oh, James Randi is a badass.
James Randi, I like it. The amazing, and he is amazing, right?
Yeah.
Plugs, do you have anything coming up that you want to promote? Do you have anything that you want to put out there to everybody that they should know about that's going on with you?
Yes, I am starting a podcast in January.
Okay.
And that's going to be with Rachel Oates and Steve from Rationality Rules.
Okay.
And it's going to be a big ideas and science podcast called The Here and How. That's coming very soon.
Here and How. You heard it here, and you hear it now. Here and How.
Here and How. Yeah. Not to be confused with NPRs.
Not
it's kind of a
okay. There we go.
How did we get here? How did things work and stuff?
That's a little bit more to dive into than we have time for here. Yeah. But yeah, for sure. Wow, that's pretty much all I had. I think it was good. It was good talk. Got a little bit of insight into the holy Koolaidness. And I think that was pretty good.
I'm actually, since we're on camera.
Yeah, if you've got I got merch.
Someone
the merch.
This isn't in my store.
The merch. That is pretty cool.
So my girlfriend's parents gave me this. It's the Kool-Aid Man on a cross.
That's awesome, dude.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
So I don't know if the camera could get that, but I do have merch. I have shop.holykoolaid.com.
There we go. And we're gonna link whatever you need linked in the description after it becomes a pre-recorded. So it was very much a pleasure meeting you and talking to you, sir. Hopefully you'll come back whenever you come through, man. Anytime.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right.